Okay, stop scrolling for a second. It's a Tuesday morning. You wake up, and something's a little off. Your throat's scratchy. There's a dull weight behind your eyes. You lie there for a minute doing the math everyone does, and then you reach over, grab your phone, and fire off the text. Working from home today. You swallow 2 little pills from a bottle you didn't think twice about. You pull the blanket back up. By noon you'll feel human again. This is honestly a non-event. A blip. You won't even remember it next week. Now take that exact same morning, that exact same scratchy throat, that same dull weight behind your eyes, and drop it into a body standing on a cold plain 12,000 years ago. No pills, no bottle, no boss to text, no blanket to hide under, no noon when it all gets better. Just you, and a body that's decided something is wrong, and no idea whatsoever which way this is going to go. And here's the question almost nobody actually stops to ask. When you picture an ancient human dying, you picture something loud. A saber-toothed cat, a spear, a mammoth going one way and a hunter going the other. But what actually killed most of them? Not the dramatic few, the many, the overwhelming, silent majority. What was the thing that got most ancient humans in the end? Because the honest answer is stranger, smaller, and a lot closer to that Tuesday morning than you'd ever expect. We're going to walk right past every answer you'd guess first, the fang, the fist, the fall, the famine, and watch each one shrink under the light. And what's left standing at the end, the real number one killer, is something so small you'd need a microscope to see it, and so close to home it's probably in your body making a half-hearted attempt at you right now. By the end of this, you're going to look at your own sniffle very differently, trust me. Let's go. Start with the obvious suspect, because it's the one your imagination reaches for first. Predators. The big cats. When people think prehistoric death, this is the poster. A person, alone, and something with teeth. And I have to be fair to that image, because for a very long stretch of our story it was not a fantasy. It was the whole deal. We were prey. There's a fossil that makes this uncomfortably real. It's called the town child. It's the skull of a young member of an early human relative, a little one, from somewhere around 2.5 million years ago in southern Africa. And when researchers looked closely at the damage to that skull, the leading interpretation was that this child hadn't been killed by another mammal at all. The marks matched what a large bird of prey does. An eagle. Something swooped down, took a small hominin, and that was the end of a life before it had really started. And that's not a one-off. At another South African site, researchers found a hominin skull with 2 clean puncture holes in it. When they compared the spacing of those holes to the lower canine teeth of a leopard, the fit was almost perfect. Not a fight, not a hunt gone wrong on our side. Just a big cat, doing what big cats do, dragging a meal up into a tree to eat in peace. For our earliest ancestors, we were an item on a menu. So, case closed, right? Predators killed most ancient humans. Except no. Here's where it starts to turn. Because that terrifying picture, the eagle and the leopard, that's mostly the story of creatures millions of years back, small and slow, and not yet armed with much of anything. By the time you get to us, actual Homo sapiens, with fire, with spears, with language, and numbers, and the ability to plan an ambush a week in advance, something flips. We stop being the hunted. We become, arguably, the most terrifying predator this planet has ever produced. Ask the mammoth. Ask the giant ground sloth. Ask basically every enormous animal that happened to be living wherever humans showed up. And then, suspiciously quickly, wasn't. So here's the honest version. The one you rarely hear because it's less cinematic. Yes, predators killed ancient humans. Being eaten was a real ending, especially deep in the past, especially for children. But as a leading cause of death for our species across most of our story, it's wildly overstated. The lion is what we remember. It is not what got most of us. Hold that thought, because we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep taking the dramatic answer and watching it shrink. Now about the next suspect, because this one's darker and it's about us. Each other. There's a haunting site near a lake in Kenya from around 10,000 years ago. Researchers found the remains of a group of people, and the injuries were brutal. Skulls with blunt force wounds. Bones broken in ways that don't happen from a fall. In at least one case, what looks like the tip of a projectile still lodged in the body. It reads, at first glance, like the aftermath of a massacre. A group of humans, deliberately killing another group of humans. There's an older site too, up the Nile, a cemetery from many thousands of years earlier, where a striking number of the buried had stone projectile points found in and around their bones. For a long time, this was held up as some of the earliest evidence of organized human warfare. And here's where I have to be straight with you, because this is exactly the kind of claim that gets repeated confidently and then quietly complicated. The lake site is genuinely disputed. Some researchers read it as warfare. Others point out we can't fully rule out other explanations for how a group ended up dead in one place. And that older cemetery? A more recent, careful re-examination suggested the wounds came not from one big battle but from many smaller, repeated skirmishes spread across a long time. Which is a different, sadder picture. Not one war. A steady drip of violence. So did other humans kill ancient humans? Absolutely, without question. All the way down. We have always been dangerous to each other. But large-scale, organized warfare as the main thing ending most lives, especially before people started clustering into big settlements with grain to fight over? The evidence is thinner and messier than the confident headlines suggest. Interpersonal violence was a real killer. It probably wasn't the main one. And notice the pattern holding. The loud answer keeps turning out to be the minority answer. Let's drop the drama entirely for a second and talk about something almost embarrassingly ordinary. Accidents. Think about your own body for a moment. Think about the last time you rolled your ankle stepping off a curb wrong, or nicked your hand in the kitchen. Nothing, right? An annoyance. Now strip out everything that made it nothing. Strip out the hospital, the stitches, the cast, the little tube of antiseptic. What you're left with is a world where a badly broken leg is not an injury, it's a sentence. Because if you can't walk, you can't keep up. And if you can't keep up, in a world that's always moving toward the next water, the next herd, the next camp, you are in enormous trouble. There's no sick leave out here. No one's covering your shift. The group moves, or the group starves, and a body that can't move becomes an impossible, heartbreaking math problem for everyone who loves it. And it gets worse, because the injury is rarely the thing that kills you. It's what gets in afterward. A deep cut, in a world with no clean bandages and no antibiotics, is an open door. And the thing walking through that door is the real killer of this whole episode, the one we're building toward. A scratch that turns red, then hot, then streaked, then fatal. People died from wounds that today wouldn't even keep you home from work. That same Tuesday morning bottle of pills you didn't think twice about? A version of that is the entire difference between a bad week and a grave. Which brings us to the one that grinds slowly, the one that leaves a mark you can actually read in the bones. Hunger. Ancient life was not a steady buffet. It came in feast and famine, good seasons and brutal ones. Years the rains came and years they didn't. And when food ran short, especially for the young, the body kept a record. There's this thing you can see on ancient teeth, faint horizontal lines and grooves in the enamel. They form when a child's growth stalls, when the body, mid-construction, hits a wall of not enough. It's essentially a black box recorder for childhood hardship, preserved for thousands of years in a smile. And when researchers look at ancient teeth, they find those lines constantly. Not on the unlucky few, on huge numbers of people, which tells you that going hungry, badly, wasn't the exception. It was a normal part of growing up. Some of those children pulled through carrying the scar. Some of them didn't pull through at all. And there's one more everyday killer that we almost never put on the poster, maybe because it's the one that literally created every single one of us. Being born and giving birth. Here's a strange piece of engineering you're carrying around right now. Human babies have enormous heads because human brains are the whole trick, the thing our entire species bet the house on. But we also walk upright, on two legs, which demands a narrow, stable pelvis. And those two design goals, big head and narrow hips, are locked in a genuine tug-of-war inside every pregnancy. It means human birth is, bluntly, tight, harder, longer, and riskier than it is for almost any other animal on Earth. Now take that already difficult event and delete everything modern that makes it survivable. No surgeons, no way to stop heavy bleeding, no way to fight the infection that could follow days later. For an ancient mother, childbirth wasn't a scheduled appointment with a due date on the fridge. It was one of the single most dangerous things she would ever do, and she might do it again and again across her life. We can't put a precise number on how many mothers were lost this way, But across pre-modern societies, the danger was real and relentless. A shadow hanging over the very act that kept our species alive. Every single one of us traces back through a long, unbroken chain of mothers who walked straight into that risk and came back out. Most times, not every time. So let's take stock of the suspects we've lined up. Predators, real but overstated. Violence, real but messier and rarer than the legend. Accidents, quietly, stupidly lethal. Childbirth, a shadow over every generation. Hunger, a constant grinding pressure on every bone. Line them all up, and here's the thing that should stop you. Every one of these genuinely killed ancient humans. And every single one of them is still not the number one answer, not even close. Because here's where everything you think you know gets quietly dismantled. The thing that killed most ancient humans was almost certainly something you cannot see. No teeth, no spear, no cliff, no famine. A killer measured in fractions of a millimeter. Infection, disease, the microscopic. Now I have to be careful and honest here, because you cannot autopsy the deep past. Soft tissue rots. Germs don't fossilize the way bones do. We can't line up ancient death certificates and count. But here's the thing. In every single pre-modern human population we can study with decent evidence, from every corner of the world, the same grim shape appears again and again. And the biggest, most consistent slice of that shape is disease. Infections of the gut, infections of the lungs. Fevers with no name and no cure. The unglamorous, invisible, everyday assassin. And I get why this is a letdown as a mental image. There's no monster here. You can't paint a fever on a cave wall. There's no heroic last stand against a bacterium, no story worth retelling around the fire. But that is exactly why it won. The things that kill quietly, invisibly, without a face or a name attached, are the things that get to kill the most. Because nobody sees them coming, and nobody builds a legend to warn the next generation. The leopard, everyone remembered. Everyone learned to fear the tall grass at dusk. But the thing in the water? For most of human history, we didn't even know it was there. And it had a favorite target. Not the warrior, not the elder, the very young. This is the part that genuinely reframes everything. Because when you hear a stat like people back then lived to 30, your brain builds a picture of a world full of 30-year-olds keeling over of old age. And that picture is completely, fundamentally wrong. It might be the single most misunderstood number in all of human history. So let me actually unpack it, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. That low number, that life expectancy at birth, is an average. And it's an average being violently dragged down by one specific horror. The staggering number of babies and small children who never made it. In many ancient and pre-modern populations, a huge share of children, sometimes something like a quarter or more, died before their 5th birthday. Add in the ones lost in the first risky years after that, and you're looking at a childhood that was, statistically, a gauntlet. Now do the math with me. If you have a group where a big chunk of people die at age 1 or 2, and another chunk live to be 60 or 70, and you average all of it together, you get a number that lands somewhere depressingly in the middle, a number like 30. But that 30 is a ghost. Almost nobody actually died at 30 of being 30. People clustered at the two ends. Death crowded around the cradle, and then, for the survivors, it backed off for decades. Read that again, because it's the whole point. If you were an ancient human who made it through childhood, if you cleared that early gauntlet, you were not living on borrowed time. Often cited estimates from hunter-gatherer societies suggest that someone who survived to their mid-teens had a very real shot at reaching 60, 70, sometimes beyond. There were grandparents. There were elders with decades of memory. The wise old figure by the fire is not a myth. The myth is that they were rare because everyone dropped dead young. They weren't rare because people couldn't get old. They were fewer because so many never got the chance to start. And those survivors mattered more than we tend to give them credit for. An elder who lived to 70 was a living library, decades of hard-won knowledge about which plants healed and which ones killed, where water still hid in the worst drought, what a certain color of sky was about to do, how the group survived the last great hardship within living memory. In a world with no books and no writing, the old people were the memory of the entire community. Every one of them that childhood disease erased back in the cradle was a library that would now never get written, a lifetime of answers lost before the first question was ever asked. So sit with what that actually means. The thing that killed most ancient humans didn't wait for them to become mighty hunters or seasoned elders. For an enormous number of them, life was measured in months, not years. The single most dangerous thing an ancient human ever did was be born and try to survive being small. And the weapon that did most of the killing wasn't a claw or a blade. It was a germ, exploiting a tiny body that hadn't yet built its defenses. And it makes brutal, tragic sense when you think about how a small body actually works. A newborn arrives with almost no experience of the world's germs, running for a while on borrowed protection from its mother that slowly fades. Then comes the most dangerous graduation of all. The moment a child stops relying on its mother and starts eating and drinking whatever everyone else does. In a world with no clean water, no refrigeration, and no idea that invisible things in the stream could kill you, that transition was a minefield. A single bad drink could set off the kind of relentless illness that empties a tiny body of fluid faster than it can possibly be replaced. To us, a treatable inconvenience. To them, one of the most common ways in the world for the very young to quietly slip away. The killer didn't need to be exotic or clever, it just needed a target small enough. And just when you think the twist is over, there's one more layer, and it's a real gut punch, because it turns one of our proudest achievements into a suspect. You'd think that settling down, farming, building the first villages, that this was the great leap forward. The moment life got safer, easier, better, reliable food, permanent homes, the dawn of the good times, and in the long run, over thousands of years, farming did let us build everything you see around you. But in the short run, for the actual humans who lived through that transition, a lot of evidence points somewhere genuinely uncomfortable. When researchers compare the bones of some early farming populations to the hunter-gatherers who came before them, the farmers often come out looking worse. Shorter. More signs of nutritional stress, those enamel lines again. More markers of disease in the bones. Trading a varied wild diet for a heavy reliance on a few staple crops could mean more calories but a narrower, poorer kind of nourishment. And here's the twist inside the twist. Settling down meant crowding together. It meant living cheek by jowl with our own waste, and with our newly domesticated animals. Cows, pigs, chickens, and a whole catalog of the diseases that we now know so well came, over time, from exactly that intimacy. Living pressed against animals and against each other, in one place, with waste nearby, is a 5-star resort for germs. The very move that would eventually build cities and writing and everything after also, in the moment, threw the doors wide open for the invisible killer we just met. I have to flag this one honestly, because it's not a tidy universal law. Not every farming society got sicker, the picture varies from place to place, and researchers still argue the details hard. But the broad, unsettling pattern is real enough to take seriously. Progress and health were not the same thing. Sometimes they pointed in opposite directions. And this is where our invisible killer received its single greatest gift. For most of human history, groups were small and always moving, which actually starved a lot of diseases right out of existence. A germ that needs a steady supply of fresh victims struggles badly when its hosts are few, spread thin, and constantly walking away from their own waste. But now, pack thousands of people into one permanent settlement. Hand them livestock to live pressed up against. Give the germs a captive audience that never leaves and just keeps having new babies to infect. What you've built, without meaning to, is a perfect engine for an epidemic. A lot of the great killer diseases that would go on to shape all of recorded human history needed exactly those conditions to truly take off. So in a very real and unsettling sense, we didn't just settle down and start farming. We built the invisible killer a permanent home, handed it the keys, and moved in right alongside it. So let's bring all of this together, because a shape has emerged, and it's not the shape anyone expects. What killed most ancient humans was not the thing on the cave painting. It was not the lion, and it was not the epic battle, though both were real. It was the accumulation of the small and the silent. It was a first year of life that was a coin flip. It was a microbe in the water. It was a cut that went bad. It was a season the food didn't come. It was, more than anything, disease finding the youngest and the weakest before they ever had a chance to grow strong. And there's a reason we get this so wrong. The dramatic deaths are the ones that leave a story. A skull with a leopard's bite. A projectile point in a rib. Those fossilize. Literally and in our imaginations. They become the legend. But the quiet deaths, the fever in the night, the baby that didn't wake, the slow fade of a bad year, those mostly vanish without a trace. History remembers the loud ending. It was the silent one that did the actual work. And maybe that is the most human thing in this entire story. We are pattern-seeking, storytelling animals, right down to the bone. We remember the dramatic, the visible, the thing with a face, because that is exactly what our minds evolved to fear and to retell. The lion earns a legend, the germ gets nothing. And so we spent almost our entire history as a species terrified of the wrong things, jumping at every shadow in the grass, while the actual reaper worked in total silence, in the water, in the wound, in the fragile first year of every single life. We feared the teeth. All along we should have feared the invisible. Which brings us all the way back to that Tuesday morning. To you, and your scratchy throat, and your little bottle of pills. Because here's the thing I promised you at the start. The thing that should genuinely change how you feel about your own annoying, sniffly, ordinary body. Every single one of your ancestors, every last one in an unbroken chain going back through all of it, was a survivor of this. They made it through the gauntlet that killed so many. And they didn't do it by being the strongest or the fastest. They did it, over countless generations, by inheriting bodies that were paranoid in exactly the right ways. That immune system of yours that overreacts to a tiny sniffle, that leaves you feverish and miserable over something minor, that's not a bug. That's the finely tuned descendant of a system that learned, across a million funerals, to treat every invader as a potential killer, because for most of our history it genuinely was one. That instinct to keep your distance from someone visibly sick, that flicker of disgust at rot and filth and contaminated water, that's not squeamishness. That's ancient survival software, still running, that kept your line alive when the invisible killer was everywhere. Even that deep, stubborn craving your body has for fatty, sugary, calorie-dense food, the one your modern life punishes you for, that's a body built for a world of hungry seasons, hoarding against a famine that, for you, thankfully, never comes. Your body is still frantically packing for an apocalypse that got quietly cancelled. It just never got the memo, which is why it panics with joy every single time you walk past a bakery. You are not fragile, you are the opposite. You are the current, living endpoint of the single most successful survival story on this planet. Every human who couldn't beat the microbe, the wound, the hungry year, the deadly first winter, they're not in your line. You only exist because yours, every single one of them, did beat it. That's not a small thing. That's not luck. That's you, carrying the winning hand that got dealt and redealt for 2 million years. So the next time you wake up on a Tuesday feeling a little off, and you reach for that bottle, and you text that you're staying home, take 1 second. Because your ancient ancestor felt that exact same scratch in the throat, that same weight behind the eyes. And they had none of what you have. And they got up anyway, and they survived it, and they passed you down the body that lets you turn a life or death morning into a lazy afternoon on the couch. That morning wasn't a non-event. It was a war your entire bloodline already won, for you.